The Watershed Association in Hays County gave a tough update today, revealing Jacobs Well remains closed as the spring experiences zero flow.
In the heart of Texas lies a swimming hole so beautiful that families line up for hours just to jump in. The water is crystal clear and stays a perfect 68 degrees all year round. But beneath the surface hides a secret that has haunted this place for decades. At least 9 people have entered the depths of Jacobs Well and never returned. Their bodies remain trapped in the darkness below, and the chilling footage captured inside reveals why. Stay with us to know the details. The beautiful trap. In the rolling hills of Texas Hill Country sits a small town called Wimberley. Just outside this quiet town, Cypress Creek flows gently through beds of ancient limestone. And in that creek bed, there is a hole, a perfectly round, 12-foot wide circle of darkness cutting through the shallow water like a portal to another world. This is Jacobs Well. On any summer day, you will find this place packed with people. Families spread blankets on the surrounding rocks. College students line up at the edge, waiting their turn. One by one, they leap from the limestone ledges and plunge into water so clear you can count the pebbles at the bottom. The splash echoes off the rocks. Laughter fills the air. Children swim in circles while their parents watch from above. The spring-fed water stays at a constant 68 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter how brutal the Texas heat gets outside. It is a perfect escape, a natural paradise, the kind of place you see on postcards and travel blogs. Jacobs Well is not a well in the traditional sense. It is something far more dangerous. Geologists call it a karstic spring, which means it is the opening of a massive underwater cave system that drops straight down into the earth. The hole beneath those swimmers plunges 137 feet into total darkness, twisting through a maze of 4 deadly chambers that connect to the Trinity Aquifer below. For the swimmers splashing around at the surface, the adventure ends about 30 feet down, where sunlight still penetrates the water. But for scuba divers, that sunlit room is just the welcome mat to one of the most dangerous dive sites in the entire world. The cave system is a nightmare designed by nature itself. 4 chambers sit stacked beneath the surface, each one deeper and more treacherous than the last. The passages connecting them have names that sound like warnings. There is the birth canal, a gap so tight that divers must remove their air tanks and push them through separately. There is the false chimney, a dead-end passage that looks exactly like an exit but leads absolutely nowhere. And there is the final squeeze, a 15-inch opening that has trapped more than one person forever. But the most dangerous feature of Jacobs Well is also the most deceptive. The water is so incredibly clear that divers feel a false sense of security. They can see everything around them with perfect clarity. What they cannot see is what lies beneath their fins. The floors of the deeper chambers are covered in a thick layer of fine limestone silt. One wrong move, one misplaced kick, and that crystal clear water transforms into an impenetrable cloud of white in less than 2 seconds. Divers call this a silt out. When it happens, you cannot see your own hand in front of your mask. You cannot see your depth gauge. You cannot see which way leads up and which way leads to your death. At least 9 people have died in these passages since 1964. Some of their bodies were recovered after exhausting efforts. Others remain down there to this day, entombed in the darkness where no one can reach them. Jacobs Well is more than just a dangerous swimming hole. It serves a critical purpose that scientists need to understand. When science descended, this spring is the headwaters of Cypress Creek, which feeds into the Blanco River and eventually contributes to the water supply for millions of people across central Texas. The Trinity Aquifer that feeds this well is one of the most important underground water sources in the entire state. After so many deaths, sending another human being into those depths seemed unconscionable. The risk was simply too high. So researchers turned to technology. They decided to send cameras into the places where humans could not safely return. In October of 2000, a team from the San Marcos Area Recovery Team descended into Jacob's Well with underwater video equipment. Their mission was straightforward: document the cave system, create a visual record of what lay in the deepest chambers, build the first complete picture of this underground maze. The team included experienced cave divers Dan and Kathy Mysiaszek along with Jim Price. They had done this kind of work before. They understood the risks. They followed every safety protocol in the book. The first chamber was beautiful. Sunlight danced on the limestone walls as the divers dropped through the initial 30-foot shaft. Fish darted in and out of rocky crevices. Algae swayed gently in the current. So far, everything matched what they expected to find. The second chamber brought darkness. At 80 feet below the surface, no sunlight can penetrate. The divers switched on their powerful lights, cutting bright white cones through water that seemed to go on forever. The walls here were smooth, pale limestone, carved over thousands of years by flowing water. Then came the birth canal. The passage narrowed dramatically. The sonar showed it was barely wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. Below the divers, the floor was nothing but loose gravel, unstable and ready to shift at any moment. They moved with extreme caution, keeping their fins perfectly still to avoid stirring up the silt. After several tense minutes, they emerged into the third chamber. It felt like a waiting room, silent and still, a place where the water itself seemed to hold its breath. At the far end of the room, a small dark crack in the rock marked the entrance to the fourth chamber. This was the point of no return, the place where so many divers had vanished and never come back. The team pressed forward, their cameras recording everything. The walls closed in immediately as they entered the narrow tunnel. This passage had not been seen by human eyes in over 2 decades. The floor beneath them was a shifting bed of rocks and fine sediment that could collapse without warning. And then the camera caught something that made everyone watching freeze. The camera's chilling discovery. The diver operating the camera stopped moving. He adjusted the lens and zoomed in on the object. The team watching the monitors above went completely silent. On the screen, unmistakable and horrifying, a scuba fin was sticking up from a pile of gravel. Just a few feet away lay an old corroded oxygen tank, half buried in silt with its regulator crusted over from years underwater. A tattered piece of black wetsuit hung snagged on a sharp rock nearby. Then the camera panned further. Tucked into a crevice in the rock, partially pinned beneath the shifting gravel, were the skeletal remains of a human body. The mask was still attached to the skull, although all the rubber had dissolved over the decades. A knife lay near the scattered gear. On the deteriorated wetsuit, barely visible through the murk, a patch displayed the logo of the Neptune's Locker Diving Association from Pasadena, Texas. This was no longer a scientific survey. It had become a crime scene being documented by a robot in a place where no detective could ever follow. The camera continued recording as the diver carefully documented everything visible. The diving equipment was clearly from another era. The skeletal remains had been down here for a very long time. Digital enhancement of the footage later revealed a faded name on the wetsuit: Kent Maupin. That name sent shockwaves through the diving community. Kent Maupin was not just another victim. He was a legend. His disappearance on September 9, 1979, was one of the most infamous incidents in Jacob's Well history. For 21 years, his family and friends had wondered what happened in his final moments. Now, a camera was staring at the answer. But the discovery did not end there. As the team documented the scene, their lights caught another set of scuba tanks, another fin. Kent Maupin had not been alone when he died. The camera had found a mass grave. A dark day in history. To understand what that camera found, you have to travel back in time to a different era of diving. In 1979, Kent Holmes Maupin was 20 years old. He had been diving since he was 12 and held the highest amateur rating available. He worked part-time at a dive shop in Pasadena and served as an assistant instructor. By all accounts, he was fearless. He was also obsessed with Jacob's Well. He had dived it many times before, but one thing haunted him: the fourth chamber, the last frontier, the place that had already killed 4 other divers. Kent wanted to be the one who conquered it. His friend Mark Allen Brashear was 21 years old and a student at San Jacinto College. He looked up to Kent and trusted his experience completely. When Kent said they were going to make it to the fourth chamber, Mark agreed to follow. On the night of September 9th, a group of about 20 divers from Pasadena arrived at Jacob's Well for a weekend camping trip. The air was filled with excitement and nervous energy. As darkness fell, Kent and Mark geared up while the others settled into camp. Another diver named Joe Moy entered the water with them. He followed as they descended through the first chamber and pushed into the second. He watched them squeeze through the birth canal into the third chamber. And then something happened that Joe did not expect. Kent and Mark swam to the small dark opening at the far end of the room, the entrance to the fourth chamber. Nobody had told Joe they planned to go that far. Joe watched in horror as Kent removed his heavy steel air tank and began backing into the tiny crevice, pulling the tank behind him. Then Mark did the same thing. Joe frantically waved his light back and forth, trying to get their attention. Mark Brashear never looked up. He just stared at his tank and pulled it after him into the darkness. Joe banged his knife against his own tank. The sharp, clanging sound echoed through the water. It was the universal distress signal. There was no response, only silence from the hole where his friends had vanished. Joe checked his air gauge. He was running dangerously low at this depth. He had to make an impossible choice. He left his light shining into the passage, a desperate beacon hoping they would find their way back, and began his ascent. Just as Joe broke the surface, the crystal clear water around him turned chocolate brown. A massive silt-out had occurred somewhere below. In that moment, Joe knew the truth. Buried alive. Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear were already dead. A police officer called Don Dibble before dawn. Dibble was no ordinary diver. He had spent 10 years as a U.S. Navy diver and held the highest instructor rating awarded by PADI. He owned the dive shop in San Marcos and had trained countless students at Texas State University. When bodies needed recovering from dangerous waters, Don Dibble was the man everyone called. Don arrived at Jacob's Well at sunrise. The camping group was huddled near the water, exhausted and shaken. One diver had already made 2 90-minute rescue attempts and claimed he saw bodies buried under fresh gravel. That diver later developed decompression sickness from pushing too deep for too long. Don assessed the situation with cold professionalism. Too dangerous for an immediate recovery. They would wait for better conditions. The next morning at 10 a.m., divers descended with garden trowels. They found a massive wall of loose gravel blocking the fourth chamber from floor to ceiling. For every rock they removed, 2 more slid down from above. It was like digging through an underwater avalanche that refused to stop moving. Don heard the panicked reports and made the decision only a leader could make. He was going in himself. He took Game Warden Calvin Turner as his safety diver. They descended together, leaving spare tanks at 25 and 75 feet. Standard deep dive protocol. At the entrance to the deadly passage, Don checked his gauge. 1100 psi. At this depth, with the heavy work ahead, maybe 10 minutes of air. He pushed his head and shoulders into the narrow opening. Loose gravel stretched into darkness ahead. He inched forward, trying to dig through. Then the entire pile collapsed. Rock and silt cascaded down, burying him past his waist. Both arms pinned against his body. He could not move, could not signal for help. Visibility dropped to absolute zero. Don was buried alive in complete darkness at the bottom of Jacob's Well. In that moment, he made peace with death. He opened his mouth and swallowed the silty water, hoping to speed the end. Then something impossible happened. The 1 in a million injury. Don's body reacted on pure survival instinct. A violent, involuntary spasm shook his entire frame. The thrashing motion freed him just enough to move. His mask was flooded, and he could not see anything except murky brown water. But then a light appeared. Calvin Turner had seen the silt cloud billow out from the passage. He knew exactly what it meant. He pushed forward through the murk with a spare regulator extended in front of him like a lifeline. Don grabbed it and jammed it into his mouth. He took a deep, desperate breath of air. He was alive, but the nightmare was not over. In his panic, Don had swallowed huge amounts of air along with the water. As he and Calvin began their ascent toward the surface, the water pressure decreased. The air trapped inside Don's stomach started to expand. He tried to burp to release the pressure, but nothing worked. The pain in his gut became unbearable. He knew from his Navy training that rising too slowly with expanding gas could cause a fatal embolism. He had to surface now. By the time Don clawed his way out of the water, his abdomen was distended so severely that he looked 9 months pregnant. He ripped the regulator from his mouth and screamed. The pain was indescribable. He was rushed to Brooke Army Medical Center. Doctors assumed he had decompression sickness and put him in a recompression chamber. The treatment did not work. The agony continued for 12 straight hours. Finally, a doctor ordered X-rays. What they revealed was medically unprecedented. Don's stomach wall had ruptured inside his body. The expanding air had literally torn him apart from the inside. The injury had caused peritonitis, a massive and usually fatal infection. The surgeon who operated said cutting into Don's abdomen was like slicing into a fully inflated basketball. It was a 1 in a million injury. The doctor said Don should have been dead 5 times over. While Don Dibble spent weeks in the hospital fighting for his life, the recovery efforts continued without him. The families of Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear hired a commercial diving company called Schaefer Diving. They brought in industrial equipment including a massive suction hose designed to vacuum the gravel out of the passage. For days they worked. They sucked tons of gravel from 60 feet below and dumped it into Cypress Creek, but the task proved impossible. Every foot of gravel they removed was replaced by another foot sliding down from above. The well was refilling itself faster than they could empty it. 12 days after Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear disappeared, the search was officially called off. The decision was made to leave them where they were. The well was sealed with concrete and rebar. The families held a memorial service at the surface, and for 21 years, the 4th chamber of Jacob's Well kept its secrets, until the camera finally revealed the truth. The footage from that expedition solved the physical mystery of what happened to Kent Maupin. It showed in horrifying detail how the unstable gravel bed had shifted and buried him alive. Scientists finally understood why the 4th chamber was so uniquely deadly, but the footage did not explain everything. For centuries before any diver entered these depths, Jacob's Well held a different kind of power. Native American tribes, including the Tonkawa, Jumano, and Comanche, considered this spring sacred ground. They believed the waters possessed healing properties and were inhabited by elemental spirits rising from the underworld. Some legends described it as a portal where the boundary between worlds grew thin. Those beliefs persisted long after the tribes were gone. Settlers in the 1850s found the spring shooting water 6 feet into the air with such force it seemed alive. They named it after the biblical Jacob's Well. To this day, locals report strange occurrences, unexplained lights at night, sounds from nowhere, a feeling of being watched. Survivors of close calls describe a hypnotic pull, a compulsion to go deeper. They say the silt outs and gravel slides feel intentional, as if the well itself is protecting something. The Trinity Aquifer extends thousands of feet beneath Texas Hill Country, largely unexplored. Experts believe passages exist that no human has ever seen. Today, scuba diving is strictly prohibited. The metal grate still blocks the deeper chambers. Kent Maupin was laid to rest at Houston National Cemetery in 2000, 21 years after he vanished. The well keeps its secrets. It always has. And somewhere in those dark passages, 9 lost souls may still be waiting. What do you think lies in the unexplored depths of Jacob's Well? Do you believe the legends about this sacred spring, or is it simply a geological formation that humans should never have entered? Share your thoughts in the comments below.